Hello everyone, it's Christina from Our Wood Home. Today I'm making a video in partnership with the Heritage Ways collaboration called Savoring the Scraps. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you about how to make your own homemade apple cider vinegar, as well as another part of the video showing you how to use that vinegar to extract all the goodness from animal bones to make a really good, healthy, nutritious stock. So I'll be doing a chicken stock using some of my apple cider vinegar and bones and scraps from a whole chicken that I've cooked. So let's get started with the apple cider vinegar part. So what you're going to need are apples. Any kind will work. I've used grocery store apples like I have here. I've used wild apples, and I've used apples from somebody's trees, someone that I know. You're also going to need a knife and cutting board, a jar or container, something to use as a weight. I'm using a glass vintage jar lid, but you can buy fermentation weights on Amazon. I'll try to link in the description of this video the Heritage Ways Amazon shop so that you can purchase through there and support them in that way, since I don't have my own Amazon influencer link. But that's all you need to get this started. So let's go ahead and cut up our apples. You want to make sure everything is very clean. So I suggest washing your apples. I use just a mix of white vinegar and water to wash them to get them nice and clean, and then I dry them off. I also wash my knife and my cutting board, as well as the jar I'm using and what I'm using as a weight. You want to make sure they're washed and rinsed very well. We don't want any mold or any other bad bacteria growing. So you don't need to cut these, where should I put this? You don't need to cut the apples a specific way. I kind of just cut off around the core. You use the core as well, and then cut these pieces into little wedges. So I'm using Honeycrisp apples because that's what I have. I've also used Gala, Macintosh, and as I said, the wild apples. I think I'll cut a bunch up now and then put them in the jar all at once so that I can talk to you a little bit while I'm filling that jar, because it's kind of noisy. So you do want to leave the skin on, as you can see. So the amount of apples you'll need will depend on the size of your jar. So far I've used 3 apples. It also depends on the size of apples. This is really easy to do. You just need the apples, some water, and some sugar, as well as the supplies that I've already mentioned. And it does take a little bit of time. I'm just pushing all the apples down towards the bottom there. So it does take a little bit of time. It'll take you 2 weeks to do the first fermentation, and then another 4 weeks for the second fermentation. So after 6 weeks, you'll be able to use your vinegar. Our grocery store that we usually shop at has a discount fruit and vegetable section where they sell maybe some fruit that doesn't look super great, but it is still safe to eat. So I've bought big bags of apples from that section of the grocery store. I just make sure that none of them are moldy. If they're bruised, that's fine, but any mold or slime, that's not going to work very well for this. So I've bought those before, and it's a really inexpensive way to get the apples that I need, but you can also just use apple scraps as well. This is what I would do when I was making applesauce and apple jams and everything. If I had some parts that were really bruised or not very nice looking, I would put them in here to make vinegar. All right, I think I might just end it with that. That's gonna be enough for now. Next, what you're going to want to do is get some water and sugar. So let me go do that. I'm just using plain white sugar. If you have other types of sugar, I think you could use that as well. This is just what I have, so that's why I'm using it. I'm gonna do a couple tablespoons. Okay, and now I'll fill it up with water, just enough to cover the apples completely, so probably to about here. Let me go do that. Alright, so this is filled up. Here you can see some of the apples are already floating up above the water. So you can see here we've got some apples that are peeking out of the water. We don't want that. We want them fully submerged, because if they're exposed to air, they're more likely to get moldy, and that will ruin our apple cider vinegar. So I'm going to show you how I press that down and submerge them completely. So as I said, I'm using this glass lid from an antique canning jar. I decided to use this instead of buying weights because I had them and they fit perfectly in the jars that I use. But if you don't have this, you can certainly buy the fermentation weights online. There's lots of options. So I'm just going to put this in, press it down a bit, make sure all my apples are submerged. None of them are sticking out over the water. In addition to washing your apples and utensils, it's also very important to wash your hands when you're doing this process, because you might be sticking them in the jar. Okay, so that's done. This is ready. Next step is to use a cloth, cheesecloth, or any other breathable fabric. This is a vintage handkerchief, but I've also used paper towel in the past. So you just cover that up, get an elastic band or some string to put around here. I'll get that now. We just want to do this to prevent any dust or fluff or even fruit flies or anything like that. We want to keep those out of our jar. I've done this in the summer, and we tend to get fruit flies hanging around, and keeping this lid or this cloth cover on prevented the flies from getting in at all, which was great. So this is ready to sit for its 2-week fermentation period. You want to keep it somewhere that's out of direct sunlight and not too hot, not too cold. I keep mine in the kitchen in this cupboard above the stove because it's dark and it's cool, and I can check on it to make sure none of the apples are floating up or there's no mold forming on it before I get too far in the process. So that's where I keep mine, but you can keep yours anywhere that's going to be convenient for you. Alright, so I've got it up in here. I like that it's at eye level because I can see the water line, and I'll be able to tell if any of the apples are floating up above, and I'll also be able to see any mold a little bit easier. So that's it. We'll check back in 2 weeks. I'll give you guys an update on how that's doing, and I'll show you the next steps. And then in about 6 weeks, I'll be showing you how I do my stock. We'll check back in a few weeks, and I'll talk to you guys then. Hey everyone, welcome back. So we're going to be straining our apple cider vinegar and letting it do the next ferment period. I've got my jar of vinegar here. Well, it's not quite vinegar yet. What we're gonna do is just pour out this over a strainer, catch the apple pieces. You can toss those in your composter or feed them to any animals, livestock you have. And then we're going to save the liquid and then pour it back into our original container to ferment for about 4 more weeks. So remember, if you have any mold in your vinegar, you're going to want to throw it out and just start all over again. It's better to be safe instead of sorry. So let's strain these. I usually let this sit for a little bit just to make sure all that liquid is coming out from all the apples there. But for now, I'm just going to shake it and try to get as much out as possible. As I said, you can just toss this in the composter, but I like to feed it to my chickens because they enjoy this as a little treat. So I'm going to take this over, just put it in the sink for now, and I'll feed it to the chickens later. I'm going to use the same jar. And a funnel. And a ladle, because I don't want to just pour this right in the jar because I'll probably spill. I'm trying to arrange this so that it's easy for me to do, but so that you can also see what I'm doing. Make sure you use the same container for this second ferment because it still has all that good bacteria in it that we want. So this will ferment for another 4 weeks. You can put the cover back on as well. I just used a reusable handkerchief and then just put a rubber band around it, set it somewhere cool and dark out of the way, and let it just sit undisturbed for 4 weeks. I'll see you guys when it's time to make the stock. I did not include any recipe or footage of me cooking the chicken because it's pretty straightforward and there's already lots of great recipes online, but I just cooked it in the oven, the whole chicken. I didn't do any seasoning this time, but I have in the past. Once it was cooked and cooled, I separated the meat from the bones and put any skin and small pieces of meat as well as those bones back in that pot there. Covered it with water, and I added about 1/4 to 1/2 cup of the homemade apple cider vinegar. You want to make sure that the meat is covered in water. If you have a larger pot, this will probably be a little bit easier for you, but this is the biggest one I had, so that's what I'm using. I also put the lid on and set it on the stove to bring to a boil. I have done this in the slow cooker before, but I find that it's easier on the stovetop because it comes to a boil a bit faster and more consistently than the slow cooker. I'm using just a regular stainless steel pot and lid. If you have a lid that has a little steam vent in it, that might work better, because I did have to just keep an eye on this pot to make sure that none of the liquid boiled over and spilled out the sides there. But It was fine. I tried to take some cool footage of the water boiling, but it didn't end up looking that great. But you just want to bring this to a rolling boil, however long that takes. And once it's consistently boiling, like you can see here, turn it down and to about a simmer or medium-low heat and put that lid on for about an hour. After that, you'll want to just check it. If you need to refill any lost liquid, go ahead and do that. But here's what mine looked like after an hour. You can see the vinegar has kind of discolored the skin and any meat in there, and it's turned a really nice reddish color. That's what we want. So I put it on for another hour, just let it continue to simmer like that. After about 2 hours, you can let it simmer longer if you want, but I find 2 hours is sufficient. I suggest letting it cool down a little bit before you start straining because it is hot and it might splash and burn you. I'm just using a measuring cup because it's easier to scoop out all that good stuff into the colander, into another bowl or pot just to catch all that good liquid. So just repeat this until you've got it all strained there. You could do vegetables in here if you want. I prefer to just do just the chicken or the bones, but you can do vegetables or herbs if you like that. I like to do just the plain stock so that I can add any additional flavors when I'm using it in various recipes down the road. Once you have this all separated and strained, it's time to start filling your jars or containers. I'm not going to be canning this using a pressure canner. I'm just going to be filling the jars, and putting them in the fridge and then the freezer for longer term storage. If you choose to make your stock shelf stable by pressure canning it, please just follow the instructions in your manual or for that specific pressure canner. Anyways, as I said, I'll just be filling these and putting them in the fridge to cool down before putting them in the freezer. If you do plan to put them in the freezer, you need to leave some space at the top of that jar. If you fill it all the way, there's a good chance that your jar can crack once the stock expands as it cools. I'm speaking from experience. It's not fun, it's a huge waste, and it makes a big mess. So make sure you do leave some space there. Now this stock may not look like much when it's warm, or even really when it's room temperature, but as it cools, you will see it turns from this nice liquid into sort of a gelatinous blob, I guess. I know that sounds kind of gross, but it's actually pretty neat. The vinegar helps to draw out all those nutrients and good things from those bones, and that's what makes it more gelatinous than just a regular stock. I'm not going to make a huge list of all the health benefits of consuming bone broth or this type of stock. I suggest that you do your own research, but if you do, you'll find that there are a lot of great benefits. So that's why I wanted to share this recipe with you, because it's so easy, it's thrifty, it uses the scraps, and it tastes really, really good. You can use stock, obviously, to make soups and stews, but I also like to boil rice in it, or beans or lentils. Sometimes I even like to do some veggies cooked in a mixture of water and stock, and it tastes really, really nice. So the broth was strained yesterday, and I set it in the fridge to cool overnight. You can put it in the freezer if you want, but I suggest doing it in the fridge to bring the temperature down a bit and then freezing it. So I'm gonna go get that out of the fridge and we'll see how it looks. So here are my 2 full jars. I'll show you what this one looks like. So this is my part jar, and you can see that it's gelled really nicely. I don't know if you can hear that. It's kind of gross, but also really cool. Yeah, so I hope that you enjoyed this video, this multi-part video. And if you decide to make stock this way, please let me know in the comments. And be sure to check out all the other videos that are in this playlist, as well as those linked down below for this Savor the Scraps series. Thank you guys so much for watching.